Brad Neuman, in your view, the impact of innovations like cloud computing and healthcare technology is not being adequately reflected in the productivity data. Where's the missing link?
Well, first let me just explain why we started looking at this issue. So, at Alger we conduct bottom-up fundamental research on growth companies at the leading edge of innovation. And what we've been seeing is innovation is actually quite strong, and we've seen solid fundamentals out of these growth companies, solid revenues and high margins. And that's really been at odds with what the U.S. government's been showing in low productivity, which has actually been falling. And so when we looked into it to try to reconcile the two views, what we found is that the so-called real economic data is relying on what we view as kind of a flawed inflation calculation. And let me just note that the way the government defines inflation, they're trying to measure the amount that consumers need to spend to achieve a constant level of satisfaction. And within that calculation, we think is where the flaw lies.
All right, so can you talk about productivity's impact on inflation? So if the productivity numbers should be higher, then what's the Fed missing in terms of inflation?
Yeah, so we think the Fed's missing a few things in inflation. We think that they're mismeasuring inflation, one. Two, we think that they're excluding some goods and services. And three, relative to productivity, we think that there's oftentimes a lag between innovation and when it hits the economic data. I'll give you an example on mismeasuring inflation. So technology and healthcare is really where the issue lies, and the Fed's actually published some data on why technology might be an area that has some issues. But let's talk about healthcare. If you look at treatments for things like cancer and heart disease, if you just looked at the nominal inflation rates, you'd see double, even triple-digit kind of inflation rates. But studies suggest that if you adjust that for the quality of these treatments, longer lives that people have been getting, better quality of life, that high inflation actually becomes much lower inflation, in some cases even deflation.
All right, so as a result of this, when it comes to investing, you think that people should buy growth stocks as opposed to value. I mean, value has taken the lead in the last month or so. You think they should get back to growth?
Yeah. Well, we think there's three implications for investors. The first, most general one is that we think productivity is actually higher than it appears, and inflation lower. So that should mean interest rates lower for longer, and that should support market multiples. So that's number one. Number two, on your growth versus value question, in the piece that we wrote, we actually show that innovation has been speeding up over time. So, old inventions like the stove and the washing machine took many decades to reach 50% of penetration, whereas new innovations like social media and the internet took 9 and 14 years respectively to reach that kind of penetration. So growth stocks, which are disrupting the way we buy things, pay for goods and services, and consume media, should be the beneficiaries of this, while value stocks, which may appear cheap, may simply be victims of this kind of change.
All right, so along those lines, you think people should go out and buy consumer discretionary stocks as well as technology. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so technology companies are on the forefront of creating a lot of this innovation, of course. So we think they're beneficiaries, and that's what we're seeing in our bottom-up research. And consumer discretionary companies should do well because they should benefit from the consumer getting benefit from these cheaper quality-adjusted pricing that we're talking about.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Brad. Thank you for watching The Street.